November 11th, 1943, 0640 a.m. near Gela, Sicily. Cold, salt air hangs over a muddy olive grove. The firing has stopped, but no one relaxes. A German infantryman, boots torn, helmet dented, keeps his hands raised as an American sergeant searches him. The war, for him, is over. He just doesn't know what comes next. You can almost feel the confusion setting in. He expects a beating, maybe starvation. That's what he's been told. That's what propaganda promised him would happen if he surrendered to Americans. Instead, he's handed a cigarette, real tobacco. No shouting, no kick in the ribs, just paperwork and a nod toward a waiting truck. By nightfall, he's no longer in Sicily. By week's end, he's no longer in Europe. The Atlantic crossing is a blur of steel decks and guarded silence. When the ship finally docks, the landscape makes no sense. Wide roads, endless trains, warehouses that stretch beyond the horizon. This is not the bombed-out continent he left behind. This feels untouched. The camp is in Texas, flat, hot, quiet in a way that feels wrong during wartime. Barbed wire rings the compound, but inside it looks less like a prison and more like a work site. Wooden barracks, mess halls, showers that actually work. The guards are relaxed, almost bored. And then, after medical checks and roll calls, something happens that none of the prisoners were prepared for. A name is called, then another, and another. Each man steps forward and is handed a small envelope. Inside is cash. Not camp tokens, not ration slips, actual American money. Bills, coins, real currency. At first, they assume it's a mistake or a trick, some kind of psychological operation. German soldiers have been trained to distrust generosity from enemies. It's supposed to be a mask for cruelty. But no correction comes. The guards move on to the next name. The explanation, when it comes, is simple and unbelievable. They are going to work, and they are going to be paid. Under the Geneva Convention, enlisted prisoners of war are entitled to compensation for non-military labor, farm work, road repair, food processing. The United States, unlike many nations in this war, has decided not only to follow the rule, but to formalize it. The rate is clearly stated. Enough to buy goods at the camp canteen, enough to send a portion home through approved channels, enough to feel normal. That word is dangerous. Normal is what collapses their understanding of where they are. The first work detail heads out before sunrise. Trucks roll past cotton fields and cattle ranches that seem to go on forever. No ruins, no craters, no burned villages. Just space, scale, calm. The Germans work hard, some out of pride, some out of fear, some because the alternative, sitting and thinking, is worse.
At the end of the week, the pay envelopes come again. Same amount, same calm routine. Now the questions start. How can America afford this? Back home, letters, when they arrive at all, describe ration cards measured in grams, families trading furniture for food, cities darkened by blackout curtains and bomb damage. Here, prisoners are being paid for agricultural labor while wearing clean clothes and eating meat more than once a week. One corporal does the math in his head. He used to work in a factory in Bremen. The weekly POW wage, after conversion, is not far off from what he earned as a civilian before the war. That realization hits harder than any interrogation. If the enemy can pay prisoners like this, what are they paying their own workers? The camp canteen becomes the most unsettling classroom imaginable. Shelves stocked with soap, toothpaste, notebooks, canned fruit. Prices posted clearly. No haggling, no shortages. Money works here. Not favors, not connections, not party loyalty. Money. Some prisoners refuse to spend it at first. They hoard the cash in footlockers, convinced it will be taken away. Others test the system cautiously, buying a razor blade, a chocolate bar, a pencil. Nothing happens. No punishment, no sudden rule change. The guards don't even look impressed. And that's when the deeper confusion sets in. This isn't charity, this is procedure. America isn't trying to win hearts here. It's not trying to re-educate them. This is just how the system runs, so large, so confident, it can afford to be boring. At night, in the barracks, conversations shift. The war is no longer discussed in terms of battles or leaders. It's discussed in terms of factories, wages, fuel, trains that arrive on time. One prisoner says it out loud, barely above a whisper. If they pay us, what must they be paying themselves? No one answers, because no one wants to say the next thought. If this economy is real, if this scale is normal, then Germany isn't just losing a war, it never had a chance to win it. And that terrifying idea is only beginning to take shape.
The confusion doesn't explode all at once, it seeps in. It starts in the fields. Dawn breaks over rows of cotton and sugar beets, the soil still cool under boots that were meant for marching, not farming. The German POWs work in crews. 10 men, 1 American supervisor, no rifles in sight. Just clipboards, watches, schedules. Everything runs on time. You can hear it in the soundscape. Engines starting without delay, trucks arriving when they're supposed to, lunch breaks beginning exactly on the minute. For men raised in an economy already straining under shortages, the predictability is unsettling. At midday, they sit in the shade and open metal lunch tins. Bread, meat, fruit. Not special rations, not officer privileges. This is standard issue. One prisoner, a former bookkeeper from Hamburg, watches the trucks come and go. He starts counting without meaning to. Loads per hour, distance covered, fuel burned. He can't help himself. Numbers were his life before the war. That night, back in the barracks, he sketches figures in the dust on the floor. If this farm sends out this much produce, and there are thousands like it. No one finishes the sentence. The pay envelopes arrive again at the end of the month. This time, no one pretends it's an error. The men line up automatically, names called in an accent that still sounds strange, but no longer hostile. Some of the POWs have started sending a portion of their wages home. The process is slow, filtered through neutral banks and Red Cross channels, but confirmations trickle back. Families receive money, real money, American-backed funds that actually buy something. That detail spreads faster than any rumor. Back home, Reichsmarks are losing meaning by the week. Prices shift, goods vanish, official wages exist mostly on paper. But here, inside enemy territory, currency behaves the way it's supposed to. Stable, trusted, accepted everywhere. The prisoners don't have the language for it yet, but they are encountering a concept Germany has already sacrificed. Confidence. Not morale, not patriotism. Confidence in systems. On Sundays, work details stop. The camps quiet down. Some men read, others write letters. A few gather near the fence, where American civilians sometimes pass by on nearby roads. That's when they see the cars. Not military trucks, civilian vehicles. Big ones, shiny ones. Families inside. Sometimes 2 cars follow each other, both clearly privately owned. No fuel shortages, no visible anxiety. A guard notices the staring. Used to it? He asks casually. The question lands wrong. Used to it, as if abundance were background noise. One prisoner finally asks the question that's been building for weeks. How many factories like this are there? The guard doesn't even pause to think. All over, he says. You should see Detroit. That name spreads through the barracks like a spark. Detroit. Some of the men have heard of it before the war, a city that makes cars. But the way the guard says it, like it's a machine rather than a place, changes its weight. Soon, details start emerging indirectly, through overheard conversations, through newspapers left behind, through guards who don't bother censoring casual talk because it never occurs to them that it matters. A plant producing thousands of engines a month.
Another assembling aircraft in shifts that never stop. Women working lathes, teenagers training on assembly lines. The Germans compare it instinctively to what they know. Back home, a factory damaged by bombing might take months to restore. Skilled laborers are irreplaceable. A single missing component can halt production entirely. Here, if something breaks, it's replaced. If a worker leaves, another steps in. Training is fast. Tasks are simplified. Precision is achieved not through mastery, but repetition. This is the moment when the POWs begin to understand that they are not facing a nation fighting a war. They are inside a nation that has turned war into a process. One evening, an American officer gives an orientation talk, purely procedural. Camp rules, mail schedules, work rotations. At the end, almost as an afterthought, he mentions that the pay rate has been adjusted slightly upward to match civilian agricultural wages. Adjusted upward. No announcement, no propaganda, just an administrative correction. That phrase echoes, adjusted upward. A former NCO sits on his bunk afterward, staring at his boots. He fought in Poland, in France, in Russia. He's seen enemies break under pressure. This is different. Pressure doesn't seem to exist here in the same way. There is no visible strain, no frantic improvisation. The system absorbs shocks and keeps moving. More trucks appear, more food, more pay envelopes. And slowly, painfully, a realization begins to crystallize. Germany built its war economy for speed and spectacle, for early victories, for momentum. America built something else entirely. Depth, redundancy, endurance. The prisoners don't say this out loud yet. Admitting it feels like betrayal, not just of the Reich, but of their own suffering. Because if this is true, then sacrifice and discipline were never going to be enough. Late one evening, as lights go out across the camp, someone mutters into the darkness, "If they are paying us this much, what happens when they decide to outbuild everyone?" No one answers, but sleep doesn't come easily, because somewhere beyond the fence, factories are still running, and the Germans are beginning to understand that the war's outcome may have been decided far from any battlefield. The next revelation doesn't come from numbers, it comes from motion. A new work detail is formed in early 1944. A group of German POWs is reassigned from farm labor to a nearby rail depot and processing center. Not a factory, nothing classified, but close enough to see the arteries. Trains arrive on parallel tracks like clockwork. You can almost feel the rhythm before you understand it. Steel wheels scream, brakes hiss, cargo doors slide open, crates move, always forward, never back. No shouting, no chaos, just flow. The prisoners unload grain, packaged food, machine parts. Each crate is labeled, each destination coded. Nothing handwritten, nothing improvised. If a manifest is missing, the system doesn't stop, it reroutes. One former German logistics clerk freezes mid-task, staring at a rail car full of identical wooden boxes. He recognizes the markings. These aren't civilian goods, they're military components, standardized, mass-produced, interchangeable. In Germany, such precision is reserved for elite factories, guarded and secret. Here, it's sitting in the open air, guarded by nothing more than routine. That's when the scale finally reveals itself. This depot isn't special, it's just one node. The guards talk freely, not because they're careless, but because secrecy isn't doing the heavy lifting here. Volume is. One mentions that this line feeds ports on both coasts. Another complains about delays caused by weather, delays measured in hours, not weeks. The POWs exchange glances. Weather delays shipments back home by months. At lunch, sitting on stacked crates, the Germans eat from paper-wrapped meals stamped with dates and locations, each item tracked,
each portion identical. One man tears open a packet and stops. "Where was this made?" he asks. A guard shrugs. "Somewhere in the Midwest, I think." Somewhere. That word hits harder than the place names. Somewhere means it doesn't matter where. It means production is distributed. It means losing one plant cripples the system. It means bombing one city doesn't stop the flow. Back in the camp, the conversations change again. No more arguing about tactics or generals. Those debates feel childish now. Instead, they talk about throughput, replacement rates, training pipelines. They talk like men who have finally seen the war from the wrong side of the curtain. One POW, a former engineering student, sketches a diagram in the dirt. Boxes connected by arrows, raw materials in, finished weapons out, labor flowing through the middle like current through a wire. He labels one corner simply time. "That's what we don't have," he says. Another man shakes his head slowly. "No," he replies, "that's what they have too much of." The pay envelopes continue, reliable, predictable, almost insulting in their calmness. Some POWs have accumulated more money than they ever held as civilians. They spend it cautiously, not because they fear punishment, but because they don't know what it means. Money here isn't power, it's a signal that the system expects tomorrow to arrive. Letters from home grow darker. Bombing raids, evacuations, factories relocating underground, skilled workers drafted into infantry units and lost forever. The contrast becomes unbearable. Inside the camp, America feels untouched by desperation. Outside the fence, civilian life rolls on with an ease that borders on arrogance. Movies, newspapers, weekend traffic. One Sunday afternoon, a POW is allowed to assist with maintenance work near a small town. He sees a hardware store, shelves full, tools stacked to the ceiling. No ration officer, no guards, just abundance waiting to be purchased. That night, he can't sleep because for the first time, he understands that Germany isn't losing because of mistakes, it's losing because it chose a different kind of war. A war of will, of ideology, of speed. America chose logistics, and logistics once built do not get tired. The final crack comes quietly. A camp notice is posted. Pay rates will remain unchanged despite rising wartime costs as targets have been met. Targets. The word is clinical, bloodless. The prisoners stare at it longer than they should, because targets imply planning. Planning implies confidence. Confidence implies foresight. And foresight is something Germany no longer has. One man folds the notice carefully and slips it into his pocket. Not as a souvenir, but as evidence. Evidence that somewhere, far from the front lines, the war is already being counted, calculated, and quietly decided. And the Germans, for the first time, are not on the side of the larger number.
The breaking point doesn't come with an argument. It comes with a newspaper. Late summer 1944. The paper is already a day old when it reaches the camp, tossed casually onto a table by a guard who's finished reading it. The headline is about Normandy, about Paris, about momentum. The German POWs gather around it anyway. They read slowly, not because the language is hard, but because they're bracing for something. Casualty figures, production numbers, shipping totals mentioned almost as footnotes. One sentence does the damage. Aircraft production increased again this quarter. Again. Not recovered, not stabilized, increased. A former Luftwaffe ground crewman lets out a dry laugh. "We celebrated when we replaced losses," he says. "They celebrate when they exceed last month." No one corrects him. At this point, denial takes effort. The men have now worked long enough to understand the structure beneath everything they've seen. The paychecks weren't generosity, they were lubrication. a way to keep labor moving smoothly inside a system that valued continuity above all else. Germany, by contrast, ran on urgency, on speeches, on emergency measures stacked on top of emergency measures, until the foundation cracked. Here, there are no emergencies, only adjustments. Even discipline feels different. When a POW makes a mistake on a work detail, the response isn't punishment, it's retraining. The goal isn't obedience, it's efficiency. That distinction gnaws at them. One evening, a guard explains, without malice, that replacing a worker is more expensive than fixing a process. It's said like common sense, like gravity. The Germans sit with that thought long after lights out. Back home, men were replaceable, machines were precious. Here, it's reversed. The most unsettling moment comes when a POW finally asks a guard the forbidden question. Do you think we can still win? The guard doesn't mock him, doesn't even answer right away. He leans against the fence, thinking. I think, he says slowly, that by the time most wars are being fought, they're already decided somewhere else. Somewhere else. The phrase echoes everything the prisoners have seen. The factories, the rail lines, the wages paid to enemies without hesitation. Somewhere else. That night, conversations turned inward. Men reassessed their own choices, not politically, but structurally. What kind of country did they believe in? What kind of system did they serve? They realized something painful. Germany asked its people to endure. America asked its people to produce. Endurance runs out. Production compounds. When winter comes, coats are issued, proper ones, not patched leftovers, not emergency stock. Just coats, sized and distributed as if this were routine. By now, the POWs understand the most frightening part. This isn't peak America. This is America warming up. They imagine what happens when these same systems are pointed fully at Europe, at the Pacific, at rebuilding. The war, they realize, will not end with exhaustion on both sides. It will end with one side still having energy to spare. And in that moment, belief, the last real weapon, finally collapses. Not belief in Hitler, that died earlier. Belief that effort alone could bridge the gap. Belief that sacrifice could substitute for structure. Belief that courage could outrun math. The next morning, the pay envelopes arrive as usual. Same amount, same routine. But now, when the prisoners hold the money in their hands, it feels different. Not like wages, like proof. Proof that the war was never just about soldiers and tanks, but about systems so large they could afford to be humane to their enemies. And that realization, more than any defeat on the battlefield, tells them how this war is going to end. Spring 1945. The announcement comes without ceremony. No sheets, no shouting, just a notice posted near the mess hall. Germany has surrendered. Some men sit down when they read it. Others keep standing, as if balance itself has become unreliable. A few feel relief. A few feel nothing at all. Most feel something harder to name, because for many of them, the war didn't really end in May. It ended earlier, quietly, in Texas fields, at rail depots, in pay envelopes. Now comes the waiting. Repatriation is slow. Paperwork, transport schedules, medical checks. The same system that ran the war now runs the peace with equal efficiency. The irony is not lost on the prisoners. They are still being paid, still working, still inside a machine that hasn't bothered to slow down just because the enemy collapsed. When the ships finally carry them back across the Atlantic, they bring more than duffel bags and documents. They bring memories that don't fit easily into the ruins waiting for them. Germany in 1945 is unrecognizable. Cities flattened, rail lines twisted, factories gutted or dismantled, currency unstable, food scarce, authority fragmented. The returning POWs walk through streets where time seems to have stopped and then reversed, and that's when the real shock hits. Not that Germany lost, but
but how different losing looks when you've seen the other side. One former POW stands in line for bread rations, clutching a paper slip worth almost nothing. He remembers the American camp canteen, the posted prices, the shelves that stayed full. Another tries to explain to his family how he was paid to work by the enemy. They stare at him like he's lying, or worse, boasting. He stops talking about it. But the question follows him. It follows all of them. If America could pay us, if America could feed us, if America could plan years ahead while fighting on two oceans, what kind of country fights like that? Years later, when some of these men find work again, often in logistics, manufacturing, administration, they recognize familiar patterns: schedules, redundancy, process over passion. They try to replicate it. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't, because the system they saw wasn't just technical, it was cultural. Trust in institutions, trust in currency, trust that tomorrow will exist and look roughly like today. That trust is hard to rebuild once it's gone. In interviews decades later, a few former POWs speak about the experience, not with bitterness, but with a strange clarity. They don't talk about guards or fences, they talk about time. How America never seemed to run out of it. How the war felt less like a desperate struggle and more like a problem being solved at scale. One man sums it up simply: "We thought wars were won by suffering longer than the enemy, but they were winning by organizing better than us." That is the lesson that lingers. Not that America was richer, not that it was kinder, but that it built systems so resilient they could absorb enemies, feed them, pay them, and still keep moving forward. The German POWs didn't just misunderstand American paychecks, they misunderstood what an economy could be. And by the time they understood it, the war was already over.